Welcome back to Financial Markets Live. Joining me in studio right now is Professor Kevin Urama, the Executive Director of African Technology Policy Network Studies, and we'll be discussing the African Development Forum, that's taking place in Addis Ababa. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you.
It's a pleasure.
Professor, the theme of this year's forum is ways to harness natural resources in Africa for development. How important is that?
Thank you very much for having me. I think it goes without saying that Africa is a very resource-rich continent. And how to be able to govern and harness these natural resources to be able to get development happening in Africa cannot be overemphasized. So in my view, the Africa Development Bank, the African Union Commission, and UNECA have done well to at last begin to convene African leaders of thought and government officials, policymakers, and our development partners to look at this issue of how really to make these resources we do have be of benefit to the African continent.
Okay. What's the objective of the forum when it's over?
Yeah.
What do you expect to achieve?
Yeah, the objectives of the forum are many, but in my view, what I would like us to see is African governments beginning to wise up to the fact that harnessing natural resources is the main comparative advantage of the continent. To be able to add value to those natural resources, be able to bring development that has not happened for quite a long time. And I say this because in the past development era we had the Industrial Revolution in Europe. The same has happened in the Americas. The same is happening in China before our own eyes.
Exactly.
It's happening in India and so on. And all these are based on the use of natural resources for productive activity. And Africa seemed to be a custodian of natural resources from where other continents and other countries could come and harness these natural resources and use them for development while Africa remains poor, as you know. Just to give you a few statistics. Africa is the host of more than 3/4 of the world's platinum reserves. Where also about half of diamond and chromium in the whole world can be found in this continent. And we have almost about one-fifth, about 20% of gold and diamonds also in this continent. And about 60% of uncultivated arable land is still in this continent. About 23% of this large continent that can swallow many continents, Europe, the Americas, and so many other, about 5 continents can be in this continent in terms of our land area and our land mass. And still, Africa remains poor. Why is that the case? We lack good governance of these resources. And that is why focusing on governance of these resources for African development is very timely and well chosen. Second point I'd like to make for viewers is that we also lack the capacity to harness these resources in terms of human capacity, the skills, and so on. And we also lack the technological innovations that are required for us to be able to harness these resources.
Professor, just to stop you there, you've mentioned something very important, human capital.
Yeah.
I mean, we have, in our continent, we have millions of people who are jobless. You know, they've not been employed for such a long time, and yet they hold the master's degrees and the PhDs. What is stopping us from making sure that we take advantage of this human capital that we have and the human resource?
Now, in Africa, there are two basic issues about human capital that we can talk about in this situation. One is the utilization of that capital when we do have them, and two is the appropriateness of the skills that we give to our graduates that go to school to study geology, engineering, and all these other courses. So we need to begin to move towards training for the field and not training for offices. We need to begin to move to train people to be able to invest in technologies, to be able to incubate ideas. And these ideas are not lacking in Africa. But what we find is that because of the first issue I raised about governance frameworks, most of the African experts are expatriates outside the continent. They go out, what we normally call brain drain, what I would like to call brain circulation or brain gain. So African continent governments need to start thinking about how to utilize the skills we do have instead of continuing to use consultants to do these jobs for us. Because we need to be able to make mistakes, learn by doing. And as long as we shut our own experts out of the negotiation table, out of the fields where these resources are being mined, we are never going to have the scale. If I give an example of the US, one of the challenges Africa will have, and is already having, I would think, is that some of these resources are only limited by technology. If you think about the United States now, in 2011, the US is becoming the second largest exporter of petroleum products. And this is not because they found oil somewhere. It is because they have been able to get cutting-edge technology to be able to harness energy from sources where geology and other science that we used to know before had thought it was not possible.
Right.
So building that technological and innovation capacity in Africa is the way to go.
All right. We've had big powers like China come into Africa, harness our own natural resources, go back to their country, and I mean, their country is way in development, it's way ahead. I mean, does that mean that probably our leaders are not doing enough to protect our own natural resources?
Now, the question is a very complex one, because our leaders, in my view, I get the opportunity of working at ATPS, where I interact with most of them in policy and policy making for the continent. And most of our leaders on the continent have the continent's growth and development at heart. But the major problem is having the right institutions, having the right regulatory frameworks. For instance, you talk about people who are coming, I mean, countries that come to mine and or even grab land from our continent. And this is because the contracts they receive is really not bringing enough beneficiation to the continent. And it's not because the leaders are not wanting to do the right thing. It's sometimes because of lack of knowledge. It's also sometimes because of the geopolitics of mineral resource mining. If I think about the prices of resources, for instance, the prices of minerals and resources has always gone down in history, except in the past 10 years. And this beats economics, because you think the more scarce a resource gets, the higher the price it should fetch for the owner. If I give you an example of about 40 mining companies in the world, their gain, I mean profit, grew by about 156% last year. And only about 60% of that were accruals to the government. If you also talk about the tax havens they do get, it's even less than that. So the whole geopolitics of resource use and mining resource use has been in a way that Africa exports raw materials and imports processed goods at very high prices, sometimes at a factor of more than 10. That means you sell something for 10 bob and you buy back the same material, just processed, for about 100 bob.
And what's the solution to that? Because it's definitely a big issue that is affecting Kenya and, of course, the rest of Africa.
The solution to that are many and complex, but in my view, we need to start somewhere. And that is building the governance frameworks, the regulatory frameworks, to ensure that we get good deals for our resources when we do sign these contracts. The second one is building human capacity in terms of utilization of the capacity and investing in training and development of these skills in the areas that matter, depending on the comparative advantages of countries. And also the third one, and the most important, is investing in technologies and innovations to be able to harness these things, because natural resources are always there. The important thing is being able to harness it. If you think about Nigeria, that is one amongst the big oil producers in the world, you have fuel scarcity in the country because the capacity to refine this fuel, these oil products into the usable products is not there. And the over-dependence on external firms in doing this is not actually secure.
Coming back to Kenya and looking at tourism, you know, it's like one of the backbones of our economy. Do you think that we've done enough to exploit it?
Now, Kenya is one of the prides of Africa in terms of wising up to the fact that they have these kinds of natural, beautiful landscapes and good animals and wildlife that can be exploited. So the Kenya Tourism Board is doing very well in terms of exploiting that, but always it could be done better through use of technology, through use of knowledge, advertising, and so on. But if you ask me, Kenya is amongst the best, I would rank in Africa, with South Africa in terms of trying to harness these things.
Okay, yeah. And let's now talk about the financial capacity of the continent. Are we capable of harnessing these natural resources, or do we have to wait for other big powers, other superpowers to come in and help us and do it for us?
Now, finances is a very interesting one at this moment, because as you know, the global economy is under recession. And because of low interest rates in different countries outside Africa and in most of the developed countries, investors are looking for Africa. Investors are looking for places where they get returns for their money. So I don't really think that investment fund is a major problem for us. It's actually getting the policy environment right for investors to be able to come in, and also in negotiating good contracts when those investors do come in, and putting in good policy frameworks that will be able to ensure beneficiation to the African countries for these investments that happen. Now, my challenge in Africa in the next 10, 15 years is not really whether investments will come. It's about how we manage those investments to be able to benefit the country and the countries of the continent. And it will not be complete if we don't talk about political capture, or what people call corruption in this case, because no matter how much we get from mineral resources and from investments in mineral resources, if it doesn't trickle down to the common people, to the citizens of the country, you will not get security, you will not get good environment for investments to thrive, and it will not be sustainable to do so.
All right, and going back to the forum, I mean, do you have the right people to be at the forum? Because I think it's forums like this that give opportunities to leaders across Africa and across the world to come up with new ideas of how to harness natural resources. Do you have the right people at the conference?
I would say yes, we do have the right people. We have former presidents of countries, we have ministers of mineral resources, and different technical experts from the continent, and also from the diaspora. And also we do have development partners and private sector who are there looking for opportunities to invest and trying to find best ways of making the investments work, both for them and for the continent. And many UN agencies who are also there. I would think that what we lack is not the right people. What we lack are institutions to make the right people work well. Okay,
and the institutions, I mean, why can't we work with the institutions that we already have? Is it that they're too corrupt? Is it that they're not capable? When you talk of knowledge-wise, are we not intelligent enough for the institutions that we have?
I think Africa is one of the most intelligent continents that we can think about in terms of how we're able to survive with with very little things, coping with climate change, coping with poverty over time, and all the aggression that we have had from development, colonialism, and the rest of it. But the question is, really, individuals cannot make a country. It's only when these institutions, the policy institutions, frameworks are in place and allowed to work. That is when the countries can be able to benefit from their resources. And if I talk of Kenya, for instance, the new constitution is a very great step forward that is trying now to make it possible for such investments to happen. And you can see that in the growth trends in the country and the transformations that is going on, the infrastructure that is going on. So you can see the environment is becoming better. So it's more about the governance structures, the culture of governance, the culture of transparency, the culture of accountability, and dealing with the big cows.
And finally, what is the main objective of the forum? What is it that you want to achieve through the forum?
Now, the forum, the organizers of the forum would like African countries to be able to understand the dynamics of natural resource development and the governance of these resources for development on the continent. They would also want the African countries and experts to get involved in having Africa lead the development process instead of all the time waiting for development partners to lead the process. In the past 2-3 days of the forum, this has always been resounding from almost every speaker. When will Africa take charge of its own resources?
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. We do appreciate it. And of course, all the best with the forum.
Thank you very much.
All right.
It's a pleasure.
Okay. Well, we have been speaking to Professor Kevin Urama, the Executive Director of the African Technology Policy Network Studies. And of course, he's been sharing with us his insight about the African Development Forum, which is taking place in Addis Ababa, just trying to get Africa to harness and exploit its own natural resources. And with that, we wind up this edition of Financial Markets Live. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Betty Kialo.